Hello. Well, good morning, good afternoon, depending upon what part of the world that you're in, maybe even a good evening. I'm Cecil with Question Pro. I'm standing in front of or standing in place of Dan Fleetwood, who typically hosts these webinars, and I have my really good friends Dan Womack and Kevin Lonnie from KLC, and three of us for the next hour are going to talk about the place quantitative and qualitative research have and especially when they're used in conjunction with each other to deepen research, deepen insights, and be able to drive innovation and leadership from within the customers that we work with. So I thought Dan and Kevin, if you could introduce yourselves, we'll get going.
Over to you, Dan.
Yeah, I'll start. Sure. Dan Womack, president of KLC. I've been with Kevin and Company here for about 4 years. But prior, my career was primarily on the corporate researcher side. So I worked for three different Fortune 500 companies over 20 some odd years before coming over to KLC. Yeah, 4 years in August. So
wow, congratulations.
Thank you.
4 years working with Kevin. Wow.
But, yeah. But I didn't have any gray hair when I started. But
exactly. He was a much younger man. About a much younger man. So Kevin Lonnie, the CEO founder of KL Communications, which we are year 29.
Oh, wow.
Hard to believe. Yes.
Congratulations.
Right out of high school. Well, not quite, but did start back in 1996, back in the era of you've got mail. Literally, for anyone who can remember AOL or the rom-com. But we've been in the online research space ever since our inception, and the community space really shortly thereafter. Even back in the late 90s, we were doing that. So, Cecil, thanks for having us.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And a little background about myself. I've been with Question Pro for the past 2 years. My experience is in SaaS. I've been designing, selling technology, software specifically, for the last 30 years, and was really excited about joining Question Pro because this idea of research is fascinating to me. No matter what industry I've been in, data insights is core to how we make decisions. And I've really gotten an education into this space the last couple of years. Working with Kevin and Dan has been a big part of that education. And at the end of the day, it's really about how do we unlock people and activities or insights through research. And so, I think one of the things that I'm fascinated about is how qualitative and quantitative have sort of blended together to provide a maybe not a different way, but maybe a better way in how we're conducting this. So Dan, I'd love to kick it off with you. And so why do you think the lines between qual and quant are blurring right now? And like, why now as opposed to yesterday?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think there are lots of factors, lots of drivers. But two things I think are going on is you have environmental factors, and so what do I mean by that? So when things are changing, think about the Great Recession. I worked through that and was doing market research then. Of course, when COVID hit, and now I think with just an administration change, lots of things going on in the economic environment, there's all those things create uncertainty. And often, when you're on the corporate side, you're looking at studies you may have done for years. There might be a tracking study, or it could just be the normal course of work that you do over a year. But you start seeing things that don't make sense, right? That they don't match what you thought you knew. And so you're scratching your head a little bit. And I think that drives a lot of need to dig in deeper and understand not only are those changes real, kind of a quantitative check, right? Are we, is this just an anomaly, or are these real changes we're seeing in consumer behavior? And two, if they are real changes, why? And that's where the qual, right? So I think that's a lot of what's driving in the environment right now. And then I think just technology. Today, there are tools, emerging tools, and even some that have been around for a little while that make this a little easier, a little less expensive, a little faster. And of course, all those things help.
That's incredible. Kevin, how do you believe client expectations have changed around blended research? Is it the same today as it was before, or what nuances or what differences have you seen?
I think blended research has always been like the uh, the goal of the research that we would like to be able to achieve. It's like the holy grail, because as Dan mentioned, the qual gives you the whys, and then the quant gives you the what. So it's always the recommended path, but it's often been time and cost prohibitive to do that kind of layering of qual first, quant, and even the qual
Yeah.
So I think I like to say for the record, we've gone 6 minutes into this presentation without mentioning AI. So, okay, I've done it. But,
Break the ice.
exactly. But it does allow for the idea that Dan likes to use the term qual at scale, which is almost sounds like it's quant, right? But the barriers to using qual to marry the quant using AI is able to, both in terms of being able to probe, being able to quickly summarize everything you've just heard via the qual, and then the cost savings using AI, et cetera. So it's made it less prohibitive than before. So I think that's bringing in a new golden era of mixing qual and quant.
That makes a lot of sense. What are you seeing some ways that you or your customers are already using that combined qual quant that to help your customers make better decisions?
I want to piggyback real quickly, Cecil, on what Kevin said about this thing around the expectations from clients and changing of the balance. And this may be a little controversial for some people out there, but I think it's interesting to think about is that I think quality expectations are rising. So, and what do I mean by that? Richer, especially on the open end, the qual side of this equation, richer data. And when I think about surveys, this is the part that some people I'm sure will disagree with. But when I started, just like Kevin, I worked for a small research firm before I went to the big corporations, and we made most of our money in a data collection phone room. So almost all survey research at that time was done on the phone. It was before this little thing called the internet completely disrupted that space, right? And the open ends, if you had a good phone room and well-trained people in that phone room, you could get pretty robust open ends because there was probing, there was follow-up and clarification. When you went to online, that all went away, right? But those clients were fine with that because it was significantly cheaper. But there was a huge quality gap for years. And I think it's really interesting that some of the tools that we have for survey research now are starting to feel like, to me, that they're going to move us back to being as good with open ends as we were 25 years ago.
Wow.
So I think that's part of, and so quality expectations are growing back to where they may have been in that telephone data collection era.
Do you, Dan, to that point, I know for so many customers, not only is the information and the insights gathered from collecting data is important, but speed is a huge thing. And it's typically a guardrail that businesses use to get something to market or innovate on an idea. Kevin mentioned qual at scale, and I think that speaks to what you were just talking about. But can you expand a little bit about what qual at scale could mean and how that what that means for businesses and people that are listening in?
Sure. Me, Cecil, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I didn't want to jump over Kevin on that one. Yeah, I think, qual scale, I think some of the emerging tools as an example of something that we're experimenting with and actually using successfully, not just experimenting with, is using AI. Again, there's the word AI, the abbreviation at least. There's using AI tools to quickly quantify open-end data if it's survey data. So you can code it, you can provide summaries and themes in virtually no time, right? All things that would have taken days to do well in a manual era. And then you can do the same thing with free-form qualitative data. And so the scale part comes from being able to do those at a relatively low cost quickly, where the scale, often timelines wouldn't allow for that kind of scale if you were having to do all that work manually and trying to understand that qualitative data. The decisions in businesses would have been made before you were able to say, hey, here's a summary of that, all those open ends. So.
Right.
Yeah, and just kind of piggybacking on Dan there, we talk about the the blending, if you will, qual and quant. It is interesting that we're able to bring qualitative features to quant, as Dan was just saying, because when we went from phone to online, I mean, the quality of the open ends in quant suffered. And they, sometimes to the point where you did need some qual to really understand what people are saying. But now by being able to bring some qual to your quant, by having AI more involved in terms of probing and immediate summarizing of those codes, it just allows us to sort of bring, it's not so black and white anymore.
Yeah.
There are elements of qual that you can now do to quant, and et cetera, and then being able to do things at scale on the qual side.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, going back to a question that I was starting to ask earlier, what are some ways that you're already using a combined qual and quant to help clients make better decisions?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing about insights communities is maybe not the sexiest analogy, but it's almost like a big box store.
Okay, yeah.
Quite frankly, it's an infrastructure. Free plug here, Question Pro is our community platform provider. But what we're able to do is bring in a host of different tools, qual and quant. And then within that, obviously the first thing we do is speak to the client. What's the question on the table? Is it tactical? Is it something we just want to do a quick pulse survey, or is it more strategic? And then is that something that we want to do some type of qual and quant? So it's just helpful under the auspices of the community itself, where you've had people agree to do ongoing projects, to be able to have a robust set of tools that you can choose from.
And in that process, Kevin, and this question's for both of you, but how do you decide when to use a blended approach versus when to keep them separate? Because I would imagine that time is a factor with this, and you mentioned pulse surveys versus for more tactical and versus more strategic type things. But how do you decide between the approach that you use?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like this question because I think I'm going to give you a broad answer first, and I think generally speaking, and I always taught people that work for me this, is that I think to be a good market research or insights person, you have to be really good at managing compromises, because that's your job. You're just dealing with a series of compromises on every project, every job, every business decision. And what causes you to have to make those compromises? You already mentioned one, Cecil, the need for speed, right? But you've got key business questions that are coming in. What are those questions? How much time do you have to answer those questions? What's your budget, right? What tools do you have accessible within that budget? And those were you're making all the compromises. But I think those are also the key factors that drive what kind of tool you're going to use. What are we going to recommend that will meet your needs as a decision maker or someone trying to help make decisions at their company? And I think we've seen, that just continued. There's more and more pressure on client side, researchers to move faster, spend less, help us make decisions today versus tomorrow or next week. And I think all of those are just big factors in driving decisions.
Yeah, I think there's oftentimes we are a risk adverse industry, and sometimes there's some labels that we tend to price is more of a factor than it should be. Well, of course, but I think what everyone is probably looking for is the best value. I don't need to go to Neiman Marcus, but I don't need to go to the clearance rack too at the Five Below store. So I think that's what at the end of the day, what helps drive exactly maybe what the methodology is. What are we looking to do? What's the import of this business challenge issue before us, and what's the best way to go about it? One other aspect I should mention too about inside communities, because we talked about AI, right? And we will talk, I guess, at some point about synthetic data, respondents, personas, and all that. But the other aspect of it is does bring a human element to it, because of the fact we've got people that have agreed to do this over a period of time. We're assured of the fact that we are actually getting humans to answer, and then we use AI to better understand that as quickly as possible. So that's just another advantage we think that with the rise of AI, it's actually becoming more an advantage of just having that type of assurance of who is actually answering.
It's very interesting. A lot of what we've been discussing to this point is qual versus quant, or the mixing of the two, the blending of the two. But Dean asked a very interesting question. I'll read the question, but I think there are some layers to it that I would love either or both of your perspectives. So the question is, generally speaking, do you believe there are no differences in conducting and analyzing qual and quant data? In other words, do you believe there is no value to specialization, that quant researchers are good qual researchers and qual researchers are good quant researchers? And I think the question of the person behind the question that's delivering this, I think that's the crux of this. But I'm curious, what's the perspective both of you have?
It's a great question, and it is interesting. I know we work on cross-training our folks here, but there are those qualities and quant jocks, and I think there used to be a harder delineation up until more recently. But there are preferences. The QRCA qualities are kind of a different group than there used to be. More of the hardcore stat guys would get together, and so it was sort of like a separation of church and state. To me, it goes back to, I think a great researcher is naturally curious, wants to know what the business challenge is, and thinks about what ways we can do it. So it's great if you can embrace both or have a good understanding. But I do think that being said, once you get down to, like I said, the mid-management level, I think there are people who are just naturally more comfortable doing qual, others more comfortable doing quant. So we probably, will then funnel it to the people that have the expertise or basically just sort of the preference therein. So, I guess if I'm answering Dean's question, in theory, it'd be great if everybody was skilled in both. I think at the higher level, you do need that. But once you get down another level too, I think, my feeling has been, or my experience has been, that most people are more comfortable to one or the other.
Yeah.
What do you think, Dan?
So I know Kevin's heard me talk about this one a lot, because I love a good utility player, right? Who can fill in when someone's injured, right? But I will say that I generally see people lean one way or the other, and generally have stronger skills on one side or the other. But I think if we think about, and this is just from being on the corporate researcher side for so long, we think about what we're ultimately trying to do, I would generally encourage people to just don't worry about those labels too much, and think more about what is necessary to help the business I'm in make the decision they need to make now. move them
Yeah.
forward. And sometimes that has nothing to do with qual and quant. Sometimes it has a lot to do with qual and quant. And sometimes it has less to do with the best way to do the research project and more to do with the best approach that would motivate people internally to do what needs to be done, right? You can, depending on your organization and the business unit you may be dealing with, you can throw quant at them all day and they would love it and absorb it and be ready to run with it. There are other parts of the organization that may just roll their eyes back at a lot of quant data, but you show them 3 customers talking about this thing that needs to be done to make the business better, and they're all over it, right? So, yeah, I hope that makes some sense. That's an important question, especially on the functional side, like where we sit, Kevin and I. Yeah. But from a business decision perspective, it's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
And think about the decision that needs to be made. The CMO probably doesn't care if it's quant or qual.
Right.
It's are you giving me what I need?
Yes, absolutely.
Decision.
You know, this may be more commentary than anything else, but in all the different industries that I've been a part of, one of the biggest challenges in getting a business from point A to point B is activating their people, right? Hiring the best talent, ensuring that talent is sitting in the right seats, in the organization, so they can provide the most value to their customers. And this is for maybe for all of you out there that's listening that is looking to get into this space. I'm not a newcomer to the space, or excuse me, I am a newcomer to the space, came into this very late, but I've noticed that there is some really exciting things that are happening at the ground level in how businesses are working with each other. And if you're looking to get into this, or you're a veteran and you've been in this, the ability to increase your skill set is always a good thing, right? So if you lean one way, if you lean quant, I highly recommend learning some qual skills or getting involved in projects that are more qual based to increase your skill set. And Kevin, I think you alluded to this, but once you further your career, get into the middle management and maybe into an executive level, it doesn't matter. You need to know both.
And to that point, Cecil, I think it's know your audience.
Yes.
One of the sort of epiphanies that made me start my business so many years ago is I was actually director of a quant shop, and we were presenting a series of charts to ad agency creatives. And I can still remember, just hammering these young men and women with one chart after another. And it was clear that we had lost the audience because we were boring the crap out of them. And I got off the stage and I was just told my boss, I said, well, that didn't go very well. And he said at the time, well, what do you mean? Everything we said was correct. And to me, that was like, well, that's not exactly what they were paying us to do, because we didn't connect at all. So when I say know your audience, it's like, when you're choosing quant, qual, or, whatever you think might be best, also you have to take into consideration, well, who are you presenting this to? Do they, do they have a feeling for quant, qual? And it is interesting. I mean, if you can marry the two, and because of the fact that qual also is great at personifying what the research is all about, it humanizes it. And, I've done presentations where I've had like qual aspects or video clips that will help to reinforce some of the findings. And then afterwards, based on the questions, it's the only ones that they have questions for, the only ones that resonated was when we had a qual aspect or something that made that quant data real, that triggered the question. So it internalized to whoever we're presenting to. So obviously I'm a big fan of qual for communication purposes.
That makes a lot of sense. I do want to move to another topic, but before doing that, Larry asked a question, in fact, asking a couple questions. Larry comes from the academic space. And so I know a lot of what, and especially my background is more in the business side, imagine both of yours as well. But I'm curious, Larry's a PhD student and doing a blended method. And is there any advice for academic based folks in that space. Is any of this different for them, or if not different, what are some considerations to think about?
Hmm.
And I'll leave the question open to Dan or Kevin if either of you have a POV on that.
I don't feel like I can speak like with great knowledge here. When I was in grad school, maybe I'd have been a little closer, but I will say that I think the fundamentals probably are not different, but the compromises I mentioned earlier is my guess is in lots of academic research, you don't have to compromise as much on some of those things, right? If you have a reasonable budget for your work, you probably have way more time than industry does to get that work done, and that alone is going to allow you to do some things that we wouldn't often be able to do. You might be working on a project that takes 1 or 2 semesters or 1 or 2 years, right?
Yeah.
We rarely have more than a couple of weeks, and 2 weeks is rare these days, right? To go from design to end decision making. So I would say that to me, just kind of off the cuff, that would probably be the biggest difference. You're going to have the ability to make fewer compromises if you choose to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would. The more well-rounded, the better. And I think again, again, AI is the 600-pound gorilla that's entering the entire, IT consultant profession. I was at my daughter's college graduation a couple of years ago, and all the computer scientists who had learned Python and Fortran, and now, with now the computer language is English. So they learned in those 4 years quickly became outdated. And when you go to research conferences and they talk about AI, there's platitude that they like to use, which is that AI is not going to take your job, but someone who knows how to use AI will take your job. So I would certainly encourage someone who's in academic and entering the industry to understand what AI can do as far as the workflows are concerned, being able to work faster, cheaper, better, et cetera. That's going to be something that companies are going to want to hire someone who has that, because that's a struggle. As an owner, I spend more time going through the financials and the implications of workflows than doing the research, which just happens over time. But that's the kind of thing that I'm enamored with, and just being able to understand how we can try and incorporate that into our workflows. So yeah, I definitely encourage studying that.
I'm smiling because I knew you two would have a POV on that, even though we didn't prep for it.
Even though we said we shouldn't, is that
be boring without it, right?
A little anecdote for Larry that just may help, and I think this is kind of wraps up encapsulates what I was trying to say. Is that first company I mentioned that I worked for when we did all the phone data collection, when we coded open ends, the gold standard in that day, and this is what we did, was a double-blind human coding. So
wow.
each word, 2 people would go through each open end, right? And they would code them, and then you would look at discrepancies. I'm going to give a real short version of it. Look at discrepancies, and then those 2 people doing the coding would have to agree on which code was correct. And so you're doing that for each little piece, right? Each comment, each open end, and that's the kind of thing that the business world just would not tolerate today. That's just they wouldn't pay for it, and they wouldn't wait for it. But Larry, with 2 years, if you want to code open-ended data, you've got a lot of time. So good luck.
Good luck. I love it. So pivoting just a little bit, but on the same topic, both of you have deep experience, both you and the people on your team. Experienced, very knowledgeable.
I like that. Good semantic.
Both of you have deep experience and expertise.
Thank you again.
In managing communities, and I have seen that firsthand in what both of you do and the people on your teams do. Now, what role do you think communities plays in making hybrid research scalable, ongoing? So going back to the at scale piece, but taking it sort of a slightly different direction. So what role does communities play in scaling and in scaling this research and keep it ongoing? Kevin, I'd give it to you first.
Well, thank you. Anyway, I think one of the things that I think of about the community, what makes it different from any other ad hoc research project, and it's like people have agreed to be part of this community because they're passionate either about the brand or the category, so they're willing to stay for a period of time. So that's your value, your asset that you amortize with each project. And one of the things that it does allow it to do is it allows it to be iterative, which I think can really be quite helpful when we're talking about this blend of methodologies or mixed methodologies, blended, however you want to describe it. But there could be, obviously, when you get the insights and your findings and you present them, that lead to more questions. Like, especially if it comes in somewhat surprising, which is a good thing. It means you're actually discovering things you didn't know before. So I think one of the advantages is to the community is you can easily then go back and ask them, perhaps, do a qual follow-up to your previous quant and get at some of those whys. And I think a community has that as an advantage. You could do it, of course, ad hoc, but it's a little bit more difficult, and your response rates aren't going to be as good. So I think that's just a key advantage, and that allows them to do that kind of ongoing why what type mix, because it's always you find something new and it's like, well, why do they feel that way? So it's like, now it's back to qual.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Dan, do you have anything to add to that, or something maybe a little different color?
Yeah, just quickly, I admit I'm biased, obviously, because I work for a company that does communities. But
4 years have changed you, Dan.
I will add to that before I worked for a company that specializes in communities, I had a community at every of the corporate stops I had. So for 20 years, I was using communities in a very practical decision-making sense at the companies I worked for. So I come to this honestly. And I've always been a big believer in the approach, and it always worked well for me. It allowed me to deliver a lot with minimal budgets sometimes. So there is that bias, but I do think the iterative thing that Kevin mentioned is really the big thing. And when you combine some of the newer tools with a pre-selected group of people that are there ready to do research for you, you can do this stuff fast. And I'll just add that since it's been such a hot topic lately, there's a lot of concern about fraud in our industry.
Yeah.
And communities cannot guarantee that you won't occasionally see some fraud, but you can control it much better than you can in most other environments. So that's another reason. I think they're great tools today.
No, Dan, that's brilliant. I mean, in the conferences that I'm attending, the two biggest topics that I'm consistently hearing about is AI and data quality, and specifically how to protect against fraud. So I'm glad you shared that. And this is maybe more for those that are just getting into understanding this, but regarding that fraud piece and data quality, why do you think communities inherently can mitigate or at least protect further against that? And this might seem like a rudimentary question, but I think it's important to understand. Oh, and I'm sorry, really quick, Dan, I know you're, but Melinda asked a question, and this could be important, is just so everyone's on the same page, how do we define the word community?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll take a first shot at this, and then I'll give the harder question back to Dan.
That's what friends do.
Community, an inside community, because it's interesting. When I started so many years ago, there were online panels at the time, and they actually, I think the term was MROCs, market research online communities, and the question, what's a community? What's a panel? And it's really somewhat of a semantic, if you will. I mean, sometimes communities were smaller, N equals 400, but over time it got to be more where there's usually a few thousand. But so how is that different from ad hoc? Let me actually answer the question in community. So the community are people who sign up to do ongoing research for a particular brand, or sometimes it's just a category because it may be blind. But and then so it's part of usually there's a custom website, there's a screening process that goes in. A person will answer a screener, which gives you a lot of background behavioral demographic data, which means you can launch a quick poll question at any time and be able to slice and dice it and see results like later that same day. So the idea of a community is it offers time and cost efficiencies, providing you have enough work to give them during the course of the year. Typically, people do, I'd say, an average 2 to 4 projects a month per their community. Some are doing them daily, some are doing a little less often. But that's the idea of a community. It should be an appropriate microcosm of your customers at large. And so it's almost like a lab that you can bring things into quickly and efficiently. And that, maybe not the question, but how is that compared to a panel? Nowadays, panels are mostly like much bigger databases, like sample panels.
Yes.
So, and then a community, one of the pet peeves I always have too is like, we love to say things like, CRMs, et cetera, but, a community should have a sense of community, right?
Yeah.
Because the fact you can't afford to give people, extrinsic, incentives every time they answer, it would just get to be cost prohibitive. So one of the incentives gets to be the fact that these people are actually changing the brand or the category that they are passionate about. So you feed back that information to them, so you kind of close the loop. So that's my rant about communities.
No, Kevin, Dean agrees with you. For him, a community is a panel of people that are brought together around a specific affinity, like a Harley Davidson online
That's
or
a perfect
BMW
one.
community.
If you can hit something like a Harley Davidson kind of community, that's a good one. Try and do something like I've done one on storage facilities. That was more challenging because it's a very transient type thing.
Yeah.
A lot of military folks, et cetera, But if you can get something that's got a hook, like Harley Davidson, it's easy to bring that sense of community. And then you kind of feed off of that.
100%. And circling back to Dan, the original question I was asking, and maybe you can take that or Kevin, but I think it makes sense logically why a community would intrinsically protect or at least mitigate against fraud and increase data quality. But maybe you can speak a little more to that.
Yeah, I think first of all, just being smaller, generally speaking, that helps in and of itself, right? You're less anonymous in a group of 2,000 or 500 than you are in a most panels today would tell you they have access to tens or hundreds of millions of people around the world. And so you're kind of, I often make the analogy that I've never lived in a big city, but I'm always amazed when I go to really large cities and, as big and sort of cold as they can seem, when you get into neighborhoods, people know each other, business owners know each other, that sort of thing. That's community to me in this big mass, right? That can feel kind of cold and anonymous, yet these people in the community in the smaller sections know each other. So I think that's part of it. And then because our community managers are working with these members regularly and get to know the business really well, get to know the way people sort of respond and talk about whatever world we're asking them to talk about, spotting someone who doesn't know what they're talking about or that might be a bot is a little easier.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned the size, Dan, and Lee Sun asked a question around if a community is generally smaller in size than a panel, how do you handle the statistical significance of your research findings, and how important is this issue in corporate research?
It depends, because some of the ones that we do have that are in, the N equals 400,
Yeah.
you're only going to get maybe 100 people or so to participate at any given time. So
Yeah.
your ability to do statistical testing is limited.
It's
But that's because their use of the community is mostly qualitative, so they're not as concerned about it. Then when we get into the larger communities, because most of them actually that we do have are a few thousand. So to that point, you do want to be able to get, let's say, 1,000 respondents, be able to slice and dice and have some statistical accuracy. But one of the things about the community too, because you could argue it's not exactly a true random sample, by the inherent bias, perhaps because people choose to become part of the community, are they in fact reflective of your universe? So it's useful to do some A/B testing. Typically, we do that with our communities every so often. We bring out outside sample and just make sure that the community answers are lining up in that regard too. So I guess to answer your question, yeah, it's like you do have to answer, are you in fact representative,
Yeah.
and so you have to do some testing for that. And if you want to be able to do quant, you got to go up a little bit larger in size. So
Gotcha.
you kind of get that Goldilocks level where you just have a couple thousand and there's that sense of community that Dan was talking about. And but at the same point, not too large where you people
lose that sense.
to anonymity.
Yeah. I want to pivot. Dan, did you have something that you want to add?
No, I could, but I know we're running a little short on time.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit again, and let's talk about our favorite topic, or at least the topic that everyone wants to talk about, is AI. And so, Kevin, specifically, are you using, or how are you using AI to enhance any parts of the research process?
Well, couple thoughts on that, Seth. First of all, we are using it. We have a customer co-creation module we've had for years, actually, called crowd weaving, which basically we'll take a transparent challenge from our client business challenge, and we'll put it out to a small section of members, maybe 50 to 100, and ask them, how would you solve this business challenge? So it's just independent ideation to begin. And what we're not looking for them to actually solve it, but we're looking for them to identify what is the job to be done. What are the pain points? What is it that they want? And then it moves to a collaboration phase where we can see the top ideas being vetted. The client gets to add their input to make sure that these are in fact valid, possible ideas to do. And so all of this is coming out via AI, because previously when we had done this, it was really cost and timing prohibitive, because you're launching these things and you want to be able to probe immediately to make sure people actually answered all aspects of the challenge. And we can do that now with AI. We want to get a summary of what the results are and what the themes are emerging. We can do that now with AI. We want to have a dashboard of how everything's going, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So you can see, so that's something specifically that, in the very short term, we've been able to implement something that is now cost and timing efficient that we couldn't do a few years ago. And so we're very excited about that. That's awesome. Then at the same point, I'm thinking about, I am aware of, other aspects of AI, particularly in the quant world, this idea of synthetic data, personas, respondents. This idea of digital twinning is pretty fascinating. I can see that if you have an insight community, so you do have that human element, and you're getting some findings, that you'd be able to feed that to an AI component for immediate validation. So the interplay between the two gets kind of like sci-fi-ish. So
Skynet.
So for the short term, I'm just focusing on this particular new module called crowd weaving, but I do see the opportunities for communities because of the fact that they do bring the human element being augmented and validated through additional uses of synthetic data is kind of fascinating.
No, Kevin, that is, and I'm really glad you mentioned the human element. Dan, one of the things that I've been fascinated about, and conferences that I've been attending, talks that I'm a part of, is this idea of a human in the loop with AI. And so we can all, maybe the scary side of this is AI can run amok, but if you have the human in the loop and having a real person be guardrails around it, around what AI does and how it functions within the ecosystem of a business problem that it needs to solve, it's important. But I'm curious, like, how do you see this concept of human in the loop with AI, and also how it potentially applies to this hybrid work that we've been talking about, quant and qual?
Yeah, I think who knows where it will be 5 years from now, or 5 days from now.
Yeah,
I think
we'll have another webinar for that.
Yeah, that's a different topic. I do think it's really important right now to have some checks and balances, if you will.
Yeah.
Right, and that even the open-end coding and stuff I've mentioned that we do, have someone go in and pull a sampling and look at some of it, right, to make sure nothing crazy is going on. And generally it's been pretty good, but occasionally you find something where the AI misunderstood something.
Yeah.
So and you don't want to give that to a client, right? So that's the kind of thing. When I think of human in the loop, it's and synthetic data, again, another topic. I won't get started. I won't rant on that, but I would be really concerned right now about only using synthetic data. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not an expert, but without a human in that loop, I would be really concerned if I were the buyer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That lends itself to maybe even like going back a step and thinking about some of the fundamentals, the blocking and tackling, as I like to call it. But what are some common mistakes that teams make when blending qual and quant? Dan, I'll give it to you first, and then Kevin, if you can add to that.
Two quick things. I think being too rigid, and I'll explain that. I think a lot of us, especially if you've been in the space for a while, there used to be some pretty rigid rules around when you use qual and when you use quant.
Yes.
And not that those rules no longer, apply in some situations. But I remember, for instance, one of the things I was taught very early on, that a rule that I learned to break frequently as a corporate researcher, is qual is just for setting up your quant study. Right. And now that's a great use of qualitative,
Sure.
Especially if you don't know your audience very well, you don't know their language, you want to be able to write questions that make sense to people in your survey. That's a great use of qual. But boy, it's very limiting if you think of it only for that. There's so many other ways to use it. So don't be too rigid would be one thing I would, recommend, or that's an error I see sometimes with people who were taught something 25 years ago. And, it's like starting a sentence with "and." It's nice to know that rule, but I break it all the time because I like
we got some rule breakers on this call.
Yeah, that's it. I'm a rebel.
Out of control, man.
You can tell. Yeah, that's why I'm in research. All the research rebels. And I think the other thing, and this is a tougher one, but it happens a little too often, is a mistake is seeking validation with whatever you're doing.
Yes.
Versus seeking knowledge. And that's all I'll say about that. That would be another webinar that I could go on about, but I do see that mistake.
Yeah. Kevin, would you like to add to that?
Just that I think the lines between qual and quant are blurring with the rise of the technology. Qual at scale, well, that sounds like quant. You have great probing on quant open ends. Well, that sounds like qual. So, which is a good thing, because it means that maybe you can get the quant you need or the qual you need without having to do another project. And that wasn't the case a few years ago. So I guess, and to Dan's point too, not to get hung up on, what the methodology is. Because sometimes, the reality is, a client can call and say they want to do a couple groups or they want to do a survey. And then you understand what it is that they're talking about, and it doesn't seem like, well, that's not really all that appropriate. So you don't want to get, you don't want to put the cart in front of the horse, which is choose the methodology for what is it we're trying to figure out here.
Kevin, and this might be the appropriate place to ask this question. About 20 minutes ago, Rahel asked a question around effective ways to ensure qualitative depth and quant reliability when blending technologies. And I'm curious if either of you have any maybe advice around that. And so the full question is, what are effective ways to ensure qualitative depth and quant reliability when blending technologies? And how can research overcome cultural and logistical barriers to community engagement in such markets?
Yeah, it's a good. I think it's a good question, and it's similar to something we were talking about earlier. Was what's the right size? And Kevin mentioned it's one of those compromises in our space, right? Yeah. And that's I think that's, I know that's not a very satisfying answer, but I think that's kind of the real answer is what is your risk tolerance and what compromises are you able to make, because it is going to be really hard to get both at the scale you may ideally want, but there's also what we're doing in business, especially. I know someone mentioned academia, but in business, we're trying to help make often very quick decisions, and so the level of certainty is going to be somewhat compromised just by the nature. I think informing even in an imperfect way is often better than a swag. And if you don't know what a swag is, a wild guess.
It sounds a lot like expectation setting towards the beginning of the project to figure out how deep we want to go or how reliable the study is. Mm-hmm. We're getting close to time. I wanted to leave a little bit of open time so what excites both of you the most about the future of research in our space?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, right? Because it's I think the industry's been under some pressure this year. When I was at the IIEX conference in DC last month, Dan was there too. We were hearing that there's a pressure on the insights community because of the fact there was just economic uncertainty. So companies were pulling back in terms of authorizing trackers and putting money out there. But at the same point, it's like, so am I optimistic or pessimistic about the industry? I'm optimistic because I think the need for a competitive advantage, which is what insights gives you, is probably greater than ever. And I do think that once, people feeling a little bit better about where tariffs exist or don't exist, we'll start to see more of an influx of research spending. And I think, as we talked before about, integrating AI, this whole idea of blended becomes much more blended. And I think that just adds to the researcher's ability to provide that competitive advantage. So I'm feeling pretty optimistic about the industry because I think it just allows us to do AI helps do the grunt work really well and effectively, so we can hopefully concentrate on giving customers that competitive advantage, relatively quickly and inexpensively.
That's awesome. Dan, any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, just a quick one. I think it was probably, it may have been 20 years ago that I attended a something called the Advanced School of Market Research or Marketing Research at the University of Georgia. I don't know if they do that program anymore. I haven't seen anything about it. It was like a 3 or 5 day thing, if I remember right. And one of the biggest impacts on me from that event was saw a presentation where a guy was talking about the holy grail of marketing, and that simply being this combination of attitudinal data and behavioral data, and being able to merge them together and understand them both at the same time. So this was, you're talking about big data analytics that were emerging, and the ability to store large data sets and have the tools to work with them. And then marketing research, of course, on the attitudinal side. I don't think we're there to the holy grail yet, but to me, that's the exciting thing about this space. I think we're inching closer and closer to it. And in some cases, in some industries, they may already be there if their data is good enough. But I do think we're approaching this holy grail of being able to combine really good attitudinal data with really good behavioral data and help businesses make better decisions. So.
At the risk of getting a nervous twitch from Dan, but I think I'd like to also do this, just touch on this idea of democratization of insights too.
Sure.
Which is, basically the idea of almost like an insights hub, if you will, within the organization is, as you got primary research, secondary research, but, almost like asking Alexa, is there, what's the current research that's been done in this, something that's proprietary at the organization, what do we have, do I need, to do some more primary, can I wed something, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's something that's coming on board too. And, what I would encourage is that for people at the corporate insights department is to try to own that, as opposed to letting someone else, sort of take it away, so that the insights function kind of loses that ability to host the hub.
It's brilliant.
Thanks, Dan. Anyway, no, Dan, I know you democratization of insights. I think from your perspective, some concern that it wouldn't be handled by the insights department, right?
Yeah, well, I separate. I think it's gone amok in many ways, but I would just separate the democratization of knowledge. I'm all for and making sure that everyone in the organization understands what everyone else knows. The democratization that turns into everyone grading their own homework is where I have a problem, and I'll leave it at
that. Fair enough.
Well, goodness, it was such a pleasure having both of you on this. I always learn a lot from both of you. I think there's just been a lot of good stuff that's happened between the collaboration between our companies. I'd love to do more of this. And anyone, we have maybe a minute or two left, but if there are any more questions from anyone out in the audience, please feel free to ask. If not, we'll hang out for a little bit, but
I saw a question we didn't get to, Cecil, and I don't really have a good answer for it, but I'll try. Ruthie Brandman, and if that's your real name, man, what a name for a market researcher! Congratulations. And
you're born for this.
Yeah, the question was about blending it, and it was really it's I think it's a smart question, and it's sort of like why. Right. So why are you trying to do one to replace the other? I will say it's a great question, but I think one instance I could think of is there are some times where you don't know how to ask the right question, let's say, to quantify something in the traditional way. So to create a scaled question about it in a survey, but you may be able to come up with an open-ended question that would get at that, if you get enough people answering that open-ended question. So that would be an example of getting something that you couldn't get from just going ahead and doing the quant study. I hope that makes sense, but good question.
Yeah, that's a good point, Dan. I think just as we're kind of putting a bow on this, just go back to that idea of I know there was a question before, what's the difference between blending versus mixed methodologies, right? And at first I was thinking it's semantics, but in a sense, I think what is getting excited is the opportunity to almost do that within the same project, to be able to have sort of a blended approach to a survey, because of the fact you're able to do the probing and the open ends, et cetera, to get that qual Y at the same time. And at the same point, being able to do qual scale. So, maybe that's the sort of the future of blending too, which means you better know how to do both if you're going to be managing that project.
Yes. Great points, guys. I think we're at time. What a way to end. Dan's Alexa responded to Kevin.
Yes.
I guess I need to turn that off next time.
No, that's okay. We're all familiar with that bling noise. I suppose I could ask what's the current weather in Columbus, Georgia, but I won't do that right now.
Expect thunderstorms at any moment. That would be.
See, there's the new element. Okay.
At any moment. Awesome. Now, I think we gotta. Yes, absolutely. We will email a recording of this call to everyone that registered. Thank you for registering. Thank you for joining, and thank you for the questions.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Good rest of your day.
Bye.